Hey everyone, I'm Rob B. With me is Rob D. And you are, of course, listening to the Property Podcast. Last week we looked at how to let a property, and this week we're moving on a step. We're going to look at how to manage the property yourself.
Yes, welcome. Property Podcast, episode number 156. How to manage a property yourself. That's what we're going to be talking about. Loads of really nice little tips in with this one that we've picked up from running Yellow Lettings, as well as a cracking resource of the week as well. That's going to be extremely useful. And Rob, it is a very special week this week.
Yes, for those maths whizzes, you take 156, you divide it by 3, you are left with 52. And 52 is significant because that's a year, and that means we've done 3 of those calendar years in a row of the Property Podcast. So we are 3 years old. Woohoo!
Yeah, we've been through the awkward teething stage, have we? I'm not very good with kids. Haven't by that age. This analogy is going to go nowhere because I don't have the knowledge. But the gist of it is we've done the Property Podcast every week for 3 years. We've not missed a week, including Christmas days, New Year's days, you name it. And we just wanted to say a really big thank you to everyone who's listened. Because a few people have said to me, you're really clever because you did the podcast and then you did the forum, and now you've got the letting agency. Really smart how you started doing the podcast to do all this other stuff. And it's like, we didn't. It just kind of happened. We were just like, if we tried to do it, it never would have worked. We just started doing it because it was fun. We just started chatting to each other once a week 3 years ago. And all this stuff has happened since. And all this stuff has happened because people have decided to listen and get involved. So we are extremely grateful for everybody who's done that.
Yeah, it's been great fun. I think we're on our 3rd intro now. We started off with a pretty dodgy one, then got a bit less dodgy, and now we're just mildly dodgy. But the intros aside, it's been a huge amount of fun. I know you would expect us to say it, but I could truthfully say it's one of the favourite times of the week for me when I get to turn the mic on with Rob and have a laugh talking about property. And I'm just so glad that it comes across that way and it's resonated with so many people. Picked up by thousands and thousands of people. Broke 100,000 downloads in 1 month. The second half of last year. It's hard to get your head around what's happened with the Property Podcast, and we don't take it for granted. We do appreciate it, and it's allowed us to do other things, like Rob said, like the forum, like the magazine, like the meetups, which, like the podcast, the majority of it is free. It might be clever, but it's still all free. So it's been great, and we absolutely love it. And the great thing is, we are nowhere near stopping. I mean, let's face it, we're on episode 156 and we're finally getting around to tell you how to manage a property. So there's plenty of stuff to come. Trust us. We've got loads we want to discuss. Obviously, the government keeps us busy with all these jobs and changes as well. So don't worry. I'm sure we've got another year in us at least to go. So here's to another 52, Rob, and here's to us celebrating our 4th year in the Property Podcast this time next year.
Yep, absolutely. And a special shout out to everyone who remembers Rick. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, you hardcore bunch.
Right. Okay, let's get on to our topic for this week, which is how to manage a property yourself. So we started Yellow Lettings, maybe getting on for a couple of years ago now. We've managed a fair few properties in that time. And in this episode, we're quite willing to do ourselves out of a job and tell you how to do it yourself. It's amazing how few people are willing to do that. I was talking to a professional, I will not say any more than that, the other day about something, and she was like, oh, well, I know you've got this podcast, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't talk about what we talk about, because people might decide to do it themselves and cut me out. It's like, there's no way that's going to happen. It just strikes me as ridiculous. We're more than happy to give all the information away. If you want to manage a property yourself, instead of using anyone else, we are more than happy for you to do that. And we've put together 10 steps with what I think are some really useful insights in there that's going to make the process a heck of a lot easier than if you were just trying to wing it.
Okay, so let's get into those 10 steps then. Number 1, Rob, it's an easy one, but it's worth doing.
Step 1 really couldn't be much easier. Listen back to last week's episode. Last week, we talked about how to let a property yourself. And it was all about how to present it properly and price it right so you get the right people through the door and check those people who come through the door, and so you could pick the best tenant. If you do that, if you put the right tenant in there and you set everything else up correctly at the start, it makes life so much easier. We're going to be talking about tenants and difficult tenants more next week. But we see this all the time because some of the properties that we take on come with tenants already in situ. So we didn't choose them, we didn't check them, we didn't onboard them. And those properties have so many more issues than the ones where we actually get to choose. So if you apply the lessons from last week, you've already made your life for the next 6 months, year, however long the tenancy lasts, dramatically easier than it otherwise would have been.
So you've got them in. What next? Well, first, start with a welcome pack. It's going to give them the most important information of the property. So not necessarily a hamper in the welcome pack. You're more than welcome to. It's not something I personally do, but you could do things like that. But important stuff like where the stopcock is, or what to do if you smell gas, or what to do in the event of electrical failure or a fire. Believe it or not, some people need the instructions. Make all the appliance manuals present too, so they can go through it all. You can really go above and beyond with the info you want. There's no limits to how much detail you go into. I met a really interesting person at the summit who had his own website and systems in place so the tenants knew what to do. The more you give, the fewer questions you'll be bothered with. It's that simple. Maybe present them with a Q&A sheet. Put it somewhere where it's easy for them to find. Use your imagination. If you're really hardcore and you've got a big portfolio, you can use something like FixFlow. FixFlow is a website where it filters your tenants down to different scenarios based on what their issue is. It's about £40 a month, so it's only going to be worthwhile if you've got a larger portfolio. But you could possibly take inspiration from it and do it a different way. You could even give them a Trello board with all the information on and just make it a public one that they can access any time. There's so much you can do, and the more you do, the less you'll be bothered. So if you want to be hands-off, it might be a way to tackle it. The other thing is, when the tenants do get in touch, if they haven't read it, point them back there first. Train your tenants to go through your information. I know it sounds terrible to say something like train, but it's like with anything, like with new members of a team or wherever it might be, you need to educate them of the way you want to work. So make sure you do it and it'll make your life a lot easier.
Rob, I know you're Mr. Trello, but I think putting it in the tenancy agreement as a condition of the tenancy must use Trello could be taking it a step too far.
Any excuse to use Trello.
Okay, next up, you welcome them in. What happens next? Well, you don't quite know what's going to happen next, but you do know about some key dates that are going to occur. And it's well worth, at this point, diarising those key dates so you don't forget. So first up, if there's a gas supply, you need to make sure that the gas safety certificate is renewed annually, as it should be before it expires. Really, really important. I'd recommend giving yourself a good couple of weeks before it expires, because you'll need to book it in, arrange access with a tenant and all that kind of thing. There's also the tenancy renewal date. So when the initial fixed term is up, you'll have options at that point about whether you continue, do a new fixed term or whatever. You might also want to diarise 2 months before that, because that's when you'd first be able to serve a Section 21 notice if you didn't want the tenancy to continue. So it's well worth just recording those key dates so you don't have to worry about remembering it. So whether it's a paper diary where you just write it in on the date a couple of weeks beforehand, or you've got it all set up with something like Google Calendar or Sunrise and you get it to pop up a reminder for you, just get it done, because it's a 2-minute job at the start of the tenancy and it saves you the potential for getting yourself in big trouble by missing these dates. Dead easy.
Another thing to do, and make sure you put in your calendar, is make sure your rent gets paid. It's pretty important. So check the rent date and contact them immediately if it's not paid. Don't wait a few days and think, oh, I'm sure they'll get round to it. Take action. If it seems like you're not bothered, they won't be either. Sounds simple, but it's true. If the rent is late and you have rental guarantee insurance, then make sure you notify them in the appropriate way so you conform with the T's and C's of that particular insurance. But don't be lax with this. Make sure you are on them every single month and never let them be late. Because if they get into a habit, that habit will continue, and the habit could possibly get worse and develop into something much, much worse, like rent not being paid at all. So make sure you're on it. Make sure that you're diarising this, and make sure you check every single month. And when it goes in, relax. But if it's late, contact them and take action straight away. Now, this doesn't mean go around knocking on the door with the heavies on day one after it's late, but it does mean making contact with a phone call, understanding their reasons first, and then once having that conversation, making arrangements for it to come into your bank account as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's so important. It's got to be a non-negotiable, not just a when you get around to it. And I think a lot of times we hear from landlords who've got themselves into trouble, It can't always be avoided. Circumstances change, things happen, but a lot of things could be avoided if you were just a bit more strict from the start. And again, it sounds bad, sort of being strict and training them and all that kind of thing. But, it is a relationship that has to operate in a certain way. It has to operate on your terms. It's essential. So you've got to get it right. Okay. So next up, they're paying their rent. In return, you need to get things fixed when they break. Very, very simple. Maintenance issues will come up, hopefully not too often, but they will happen. When they do, you need to have a procedure in place for reporting those issues. And this is where you can make life either easy for yourself or hard for yourself. If you have a proper procedure, it will just save you a lot of time and make things easier for everyone. If you can, setting the expectation that maintenance should be reported by email is perfect because, for a start, it doesn't interrupt you in the same way that a phone call does. But also, it gives you an audit trail of the communication that's happened. So if they say later that you haven't been responsive, it makes it really easy for you to dig out the emails and say, look, you've reported it on this date, I replied on this date, here we go. If it's more appropriate to do things on the phone, again, make life easy for yourself. Don't necessarily give out your personal mobile number. Instead, you could have a dedicated phone number. You can get a Skype number, it's dead cheap. Or you could have a call answering service for about £1 per call, you can get someone else to answer it, pick it up, forward the details over to you, and you can respond when it's convenient to you. Just these little things turn it from something ad hoc to something where there's a system, it makes sense, and it saves you a great deal of time.
Gotta love a system. Next, maintenance requests. You're going to get them, okay? But it doesn't mean that you have to respond to a leaky tap in the middle of the night. Everything with proportion. So, yes, you should get back to people within a reasonable amount of time, but don't feel like you should be a 24-hour call centre either to the tenants. If it's an emergency, fair enough. But hopefully, you've trained the tenants, got them to go through processes, understand what to do when you've let the property. So if this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. That comes back to that welcome pack we talked about earlier. Make sure when you speak to the tenants, if it comes to that you're getting the right information. They're going to tell you their problem, but you need to understand the cause. What's happened and what's causing that problem. So if something's not working or something's not happening, the washing machine not working isn't helpful to you. But why it's not working and what was done leading up to it not working is important. So make sure you get that, because all the tenants will want to do, and I understand why, is tell you their problem. What you need to understand is how that problem's occurred so you understand the best way to fix it. It means that you can offer them a better service. Now, nothing ever solves itself. The washing machine isn't going to miraculously fix itself. There's no point in delaying essential maintenance. And it will deter the relationship between you and your tenant if you do so. So make sure that you do take action. So there's one thing getting up in the middle of the night to look at a broken washing machine. There's another thing waiting 3 weeks to get it fixed. You've got to have a happy balance. And once it's done, get written confirmation from the tenant that it's all okay now. Seems like a simple thing to do, but it just closes the issue off with them. So just get confirmation that they're now happy and we can move on.
So when something does go wrong, you've got two choices. You could either go and sort it out yourself, or you can find someone to do it for you. It will not come as a shock if you have been any kind of regular listener over the last few years that Rob and I favour getting someone else to do it. You would not want me turning up to solve any issue you have of any kind unless it's related to a spreadsheet or a sentence. That's about as far as I get. When it comes to maintenance, not much use. If you can find a great handyman or general tradesperson, it will make your life a lot easier. The ideal is that when an issue comes in, you can just forward it on to your regular, reliable person. They can arrange with a tenant to go around and sort it out. Sort it, you just get the invoice, you pay it, you're done. That is the ideal. If you can make that happen, then managing a property becomes so much easier. It's not easy, of course. If you've got 10 properties in the same area, then maybe you're giving a tradesperson enough business that they will be responsive and they'll prioritize your business and so on. But if you've only got one or two, it is going to be difficult to find someone who's reliable and is going to take your jobs seriously when they might only be sporadic. But if you do manage to do it, the effort that you put in will pay off so much. It's really, really useful. Other than recommendations, there are sites where you can find tradespeople. We'll link to a couple of them in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/how-to-manage. mybuilder.com is one. Check a Trade is another. They're nice because while you don't know these people, it's got copies of their certificates. It's got reviews from people in the past. So that can be a really good way, one I've used in the past, of finding people. Once you found someone good, keep them sweet, be nice, pay quickly, treat them well. Very easy.
Another thing to be doing is inspections. So at Yellow, we do them after 6 weeks and then every 6 months. I know a lot of agents just do them every 6 months, but if problems are going to arise, they're going to arise early on. So that's why we get here after 6. You're going to notice by then if the tenant's a good tenant or not a good tenant. So you might want to use the same schedule. So 6 weeks, then every 6 months. When you do, make sure you're checking out things like the smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms and things like that. Visually inspect all the electrics. Now you don't have to be an electrician, but does it all look okay? Check out for signs of damp. I'm sure your tenant would point them out, but have a look for yourself. And let the tenant know if there's anything they should be doing differently. So if you have an older property and you are starting to notice a little bit of damp around the windows or what have you, maybe get them used to ventilating the property a little bit more. That will save you future problems. So by educating them about the property and how best to run it, it's only going to go in your favour. Also, if they've started to make unauthorised changes, you might not want to necessarily fall out with them straight away, but point out to them that they're going to have to put it back to the original condition to make sure they get the deposit back. Explaining that to them up front and in plenty of time in advance is going to prevent a lot of potential arguments down the line.
Okay, so you've done all these things. You've got 6 months or a year into the future. Everything's gone swimmingly because of the systems you've set up and the way that you've approached it. So now you're at the end of the fixed term. At this point, you've got options, and this very much falls under managing the property as well. So what can you do? Well, at the end of a fixed term, you can decide to do one of two things. You can either let it just continue on a periodic basis, or you can start a new fixed term. We won't go into the details of that in any great detail right now, but broadly, the advantage of a fixed term is that they are tied in, so you know that the tenant is going to stay for another period of time, and you don't have to worry about them suddenly giving notice and leaving. The downside is that you are also locked in. If you just let it run on a month-by-month basis, then it means that you can get them out or get the property back if you want to. So it's up to you, but also up to them whether they want to commit to another period or just let it run. At the end of the fixed term, whatever you decide to do next, you can review the rent if you want to. You could decide that the tenant is good. Even if you could put the rent up, you want to keep them happy. You don't want to. That's fine, but it's a good chance to look at it. And if the tenant is leaving at the end of the fixed term, we've just talked about inspections, but do another inspection, an extra one, a month before they're due to leave, to give them the chance to put anything right that would be deducted from their deposit. It's only fair to give them a chance to put anything wrong rather than just springing it on them later. But also, if you don't have to make deductions from the deposit, it just makes life easier all round. When that happens, you obviously want to check them out. You want to go and do another inventory at the end to see the condition that the property is in, and then return their deposit within the correct time frame and handle deductions in line with the policy of the deposit scheme. So the reason that the deposit schemes came in was that previously landlords were taking the deposit and then basically seeing it as free money and not giving it back whatever happened. Now, you need to make a case for any deductions you make, and if the tenant wants to contest it, then they can do. This is why having the inventory and documenting everything is so important. If you need to make deductions, hopefully it's something you can just agree between you and the tenant. If not, there is a set procedure to follow, and whichever scheme you use, the information will be on their website so you can see what you need to do. So moving the tenant in properly is really important. Doing things correctly along the way is really important, and so is moving them out. It's a real start to finish process. And the thing about lettings is it kind of comes in fits and starts. There's a lot of work at the start, then there's sporadic work in the middle. There could be a couple of months where nothing happens, and then suddenly there's an urgent issue. But then at the end, there's another kind of burst of activity when you need to get the tenant moved out in the correct way. So it's well worth planning for that, knowing when the fixed term is coming to an end, having it in your diary and giving them a chance to put things right, and then following the rules to the letter when it comes to returning the deposit.
And nearly there, number 10, also very important, is keeping up to date. Regulations change often, unfortunately, and the government likes to have a good old medal and give us new hoops to jump through or change the hoops that we have to jump through. So make sure you're on top of it. Ignorance is no excuse, unfortunately. That won't wash. Now, it's not as hard as you would expect to keep on top of things. If you already listen to the podcast, we will mention them, of course. The forum, the Property Hub, another great way to find out about the main things that are going on. But also consider local landlord groups or the National Landlords Association. Both are good ways of finding out what's happening. They'll notify you, they'll send you emails, get on their email lists and find out what's happening and when, so you can make sure you stay on top of all the changes that seem to be, Rob, far too frequent for my liking.
Yeah, they are particularly frequent. I don't know if it's just that we're noticing them more over the last couple of years or if more has changed, but they do always seem to be changing, and ignorance is no excuse. So really there's two parts to this. There's the bits that change, like the specific regulations, but then there's also the underlying principles. And the underlying principles never change. It's basically just about being professional and treating your tenants like you'd like to be treated. They are the purchaser of a service. You are a business that is offering that service. Everyone has different ways of handling it. Some people like to be like very, very friendly with their tenants, know their dog's name and all the rest of it. Others are a bit more remote, but it doesn't matter. As long as you're treating them properly, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the best thing to do for you, because it means your property will be used better. You'll have far fewer issues. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just follow the basic principles. And I think there are some nice little tips in there that will allow you to save a bit of time. And when you're managing one property, maybe it's not a big deal. But if you're self-managing a bigger portfolio, every little bit of time you can shave off it and every system you can put in place really does help.
Okay, so last week we went through how to let a property. This week we've gone through how to manage it. Next week it's related. We'll come to that shortly and give you the resource of the week. But before we do, let's take time to acknowledge this outstanding individual who's left us a 5-star review, Rob. And this week it comes from Alexander. And Alexander says, I've been listening to the two Robs for a while now, and their advice is of the highest quality, yet in a fun and concise way. From that allows the listener to learn a lot in a short amount of time. They've helped me to affirm my ambition to enter the property industry post-university, and I can't wait to employ all that I've learned. 5 stars. Well, thank you, Alexander. We do appreciate your reviews, and to everyone who's left one. We've had over 300 now. So 3 years into the Property Podcast, and we've had over 300 reviews, and only 1 or 2 negative ones, you Grinches. But to those wonderful people who've left us 5 stars, thank you. It's probably why we're so chirpy for 3 years on the bounce, because it's so nice to understand the impact it's having on you all. And the only way we get to know is when you tell us. So thank you.
Yep, 300 reviews, but we're still greedy for more. Please, if you haven't left us a review, please do. I keep speaking to people who say, love the podcast, absolutely brilliant. But I've been listening, I've learned this, I've learned that. I'm going to get you around to leaving you a review one day. No, do it. I don't know if banging my desk is going to be picked up. Hang on. That's me banging the desk saying, do it. Please leave it.
It's taken 3 years to get you angry, Rob.
No, it's not angry. Of course, it is a pain. We're very grateful that you listen. But if you would like to leave us a review, please do. It makes us very, very happy. And you'll get read out on air. What more do you want? Actually, I know what more you might want. Maybe you want a resource of the week.
Of course you do. And this week we thank Simon Allen, a mortgage broker, been on the summit twice actually. So he obviously enjoys it, which is great. But even better still, he's sent us a resource, and it's called clearscore.com. And it's a new one to me, Rob.
Yeah, thank you to Simon for this. Simon tipped us off on a previous resource of the week, which is called Noddle, which is a way of accessing your credit report for free. This is another one. He seems to have a bit of a niche in these. This is exactly the same thing, but from a different credit agency. This is Equifax. The other one I think was Call Credit. I can't remember right now. But the point is, there are 3 credit agencies, 3 main ones. They all hold slightly different information about you. And it's really important to know the information they hold. So if it's incorrect, you can do something about it, because it can jeopardize mortgage applications. Clearscore.com is a way of accessing your Equifax report for free. It's dead easy to sign up, and it presents it all really nicely. So it's an absolute no-brainer to take literally 2 minutes to set yourself up on it. Then you can just review it every so often to make sure there's nothing showing on there that could cause you problems. We talked about diarising things earlier. Make a note every month to go in and look at your credit file, because it's so much better to notice it in advance when you can do something about it than wait and have a mortgage application go south when it could jeopardise a property purchase. It's one of those basics that saves you a massive amount of hassle if you do it. So thank you to Simon for that one. Really great tool.
So next week, we are going to look at, and this should be an interesting one, how to handle a nightmare tenant. Now, hopefully, if you followed all the information from last week and all the information from this week, you won't have to deal with this. But sometimes, even with the best prevention measures, tenants go bad. Yes, they do. Now, it doesn't mean they are evil, but sometimes circumstances mean that the tenant situation turns into a nightmare situation. So next week we're going to cover off what hopefully you can do to prevent it, but then also what to do if it happens. So it should be a extremely valuable podcast, but we'll let you decide.
Yeah, we will vote with your ears. By continuing to listen or not. But we hope that you do. And again, thank you so much for the last 3 years. I could never have predicted that we would have got to episode 156 and that so many brilliant things would have happened and we'd have met so many amazing people along the way. We know that we're in a very privileged position and we are going to keep on giving it our all every week and hopefully doing you proud.
Yeah, thank you everyone. We do appreciate it. We love what we do, and it's only because you love what we do that we get to do what we love to do. I think on that note, Rob, we probably best end.
Yeah, I think we should. And also, this would be a great point to say thank you to our editor, Chris, who's also been with us for 3 years. And he is the reason that you are still listening. If you heard the raw version of this, my God.
Particularly on Ask Rob and Rob, where it takes me 20 goes to read out the telephone number. I'm not kidding. I don't know why, but that number confuses me every single time. So thank you, Chris, for 3 years of patience.
Yeah. On that note, before we give away any more of our secrets, let's call it a day. Ask Rob and Rob with that phone number. We'll be back on Tuesday. We'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.